All right, hello. This is a new episode of WCN TV. It's a Patreon week. I usually do a Patreon-only episode. We'll see how this one ends up going out. I'm not quite sure yet. Patreon episodes do allow me the kind of freedom to have stuff that's a little more personal or private, or that stuff that isn't necessarily for everyone's ears. And even, that goes the same for interviews. But I thought I would be self-indulgent here and do a little episode focused on WINCE, and I asked people from Patreon to submit questions relating to WINCE. I just released a new WINCE release, the first new work produced since 2019, called New Rules for Slaughter Volume 1. It's the first in a series that'll kind of follow this path. It's a digital-only release, which, there's a reason for that. It's available at bandcamp.com. or whitesandhappynoise.bandcamp.com, I think. And yeah, it's the first new material I've done in quite a while. It's a very different approach, sound-wise and process-wise, than anything I've done before. So first question here, I'll just kind of go through these in chronological order. What is your vision as a whole for WINCE? How has it changed over time, if at all? Also, why the name WINCE? Besides its obvious association with pain, what does it mean to you in the project? It's always really focused on, after the first couple releases, always really focused on kind of a exploration of painful, uncomfortable, unsatisfying, harsh noise. The name WINCE, I guess, also comes from pain, of course, but it's more an association or a connection with personal pain in terms of shame or embarrassment or regret. It could have been called cringe. That was actually a name that kind of more exemplifies what I wanted to convey with it emotionally. And I think I thought of the name, but the word cringe just is bad. And this was before the word cringe really entered the pop culture lexicon. But WINCE comes more appropriate, just kind of having those moments where you think back on something you did or said and just kind of grit your teeth or wince in kind of shame or embarrassment about it. It's something that's kind of fueled the project in the beginning, not so much anymore, but I mean, life is constantly embarrassing. You're constantly cringing. At least I am back on, yourself 1 or 2 or 3 years ago. I don't know if that ever ends. I think it has. It's slowed down for sure, but I think that's kind of a constant theme in my life, and I think a lot of what the project kind of tries to deal with. Next question. Interested to hear your thoughts on opting for a digital-only release. Is this part of the evolution of WINCE as a project? I feel like this might open up more of a discussion on the quality of Bandcamp noise too, perhaps. For several years, I've been kind of feeling tired of my methods, my setup, my gear, kind of this standard approach to harsh noise that you use a contact mic, some pedals, some distortion, mix it together, get some feedback in there. That's beautiful materials, but there's a limit to it. And it's not that I think people shouldn't do that anymore. I would never do that anymore. But I feel like at some point I've done kind of what I want to do more or less with this setup that I have. The things I want to hear, I don't think I could do with any gear that I know of, or, and I don't have money to test out and buy a ton of crazy new gear. I love this like crude, like no gear focused approach. That's kind of how I always work. But at some point when you want to hit certain sounds or certain things, you're not going to achieve that with, a feedback loop or a contact mic and a pedal and, your analog tape distortion. So for a long time, I've been thinking about what are the new methods that I could try to find a new sound for me, at least. Not necessarily that's new to harsh noise, because I think everything's been tried and explored, but that's new for me that I can really kind of like exploit and dig into, kind of the way I have with the sound that I have with my gear. And I kind of at some point arrived at the fact, okay, I want to use a computer, because that's kind of always been a taboo for me. It's something I still kind of subconsciously balk at when I hear or see someone doing digital noise. But I think that's foolish, and I think I know that there's like a lot of possibilities within a computer that I don't know anything about. So I don't know, for a long time I was really convinced that I wanted to learn Max MSP first and kind of use it as a basis. I messed around with it. I've kind of, it's really hard for me to learn. It's cool. I'm going to continue learning it, but it didn't immediately yield any sound producing results that were unique. I think it could at some point if I go further with it, and I hope to, but it didn't really. It was more about the structuring of signal flow and things like that, and not really like getting to new sounds. So I did find through some kind of random software methods that are not related to really making music, a new process for making noise and processing and editing audio that's really different than what I've ever done before. And I found really unique results with it that were very different, but in the same wheelhouse, kind of ideologically, as WINCE, the sounds that I usually go for and want and search for. So it was a really kind of a fast process. I wanted to release it as soon as possible. It was kind of like a truly experimental release, and this series will continue to be that. Like, it's really just experimenting with these things and not necessarily crafting it like it has to be a perfect album. I'm heavily, this series is heavily inspired and influenced by modern rap music, how it's released and how it's produced. Kind of like the mixtape culture of, releasing projects digitally, a lot of tracks on them, not even necessarily all good. Like sometimes the lack of quality control that comes about. Guys go into the studio for like a week and bang out a bunch of tracks and put them all on they call it a mixtape, but it's just a release that is kind of a collection. I don't really advocate this approach, but it did kind of guide my working method in this, and that I wanted to just release it like right away when it was done. I didn't want to go through the waiting time of well, first of all, changing the material, because these files were exported extremely clipped. Like, once I uploaded them to Bandcamp, it did some processing on them that kind of normalized it, but previous to that, they were so loud that when I opened them in VLC Player, I couldn't listen to them on headphones because it would literally like damage the headphones like on one, and I had to turn the fader of the output of the program all the way down, and then it sounded different. So there was some actual like clipping of the player going on digitally, which fortunately when I uploaded them to Bandcamp and then re-downloaded them, it has taken care of that, so you can listen to it as a normal audio file. It's still loud as fuck though. So it just, that's the way that this release was supposed to be. There may be a CD version of it at some point. Maybe if there are more volumes that I produce, I'll do like a collection best of kind of CD. So it is on physical, but just for this release, yeah, I wanted it to be digital only, just to get it out right away. And I was excited about it. I was really excited about just finishing it and just getting it out before mulling it over forever. I was happy with it. I knew I was happy with it. It's not perfect. It's a process and it's an experiment that I'm very happy with and that I want to get out to people. I decided to make it pretty expensive just because I like round numbers. I want people to come into it treating it with more attention than just something that they can skip through on Bandcamp and check out and see if they like it. I know that that's people will have different thoughts about that, but if spending €10 on a release that goes to me is a problem for you and you don't want to do that, then just don't do it. I don't think this will be the future of WINCE just releasing digital stuff, but I do think they're, I am kind of slowly getting away from this attitude that only analog is real, only physical is real. I do think physical is the most important, but I think tapes at this point, I'm kind of over them. Especially for material like this, it's super loud and full frequency, and tape would not do it any justice. CD would be fine, but it's also technically like, dithering it and changing it. And a lot of my time I spend listening to music I listen to from my computer. That's just how it is. I think that's a modern symptom that a lot of people are suffering, but I think it's okay. I think finding ways to release music digitally that still give it some sort of weight and importance is what is important to find. And Bandcamp isn't that, but it's maybe a step in that direction. And I feel like this way, I didn't make it available for streaming, this release, just a couple of tracks you can listen to. I feel like this way, if you want to hear it and if you buy it, you're going to listen to it more than if you just kind of don't care and just sample it. You might not really give it the ear. So maybe that's one of the keys to making it a serious release that'll be listened to. I don't know. Next question. I'd love to know a gear rundown. Don't have to give away any secrets of the trade, but even a general sweep. So my general setup before this release, kind of my analog setup, I don't mind saying kind of a few basic essential pieces to it. Kind of the main signal processor that I use that kind of everything runs through and is a main final distortion effect, and kind of a mixer as well, is a Yamaha MT120 4-track. I don't use it as a recorder. I think mine is broken, but I do run multiple signals into it super hot, mix them. I sometimes will run a feedback loop through it. And I have a mixer then that I run, kind of bounce signals back and forth between. A pedal I use really frequently is Boss Hyperfuzz pedal. And funnily enough, I talked to I realized with a couple other people recently, is that I use it, but I would say 80% of the time I'm using the overdrive setting, because the cool thing about the pedal is it has a knob with 3 different kind of distortion circuits or settings, 2 different fuzzes, and then 1 overdrive. And the overdrive sounds really great. It's super loud. And oftentimes, especially when running into the tape deck, that's exactly what I need to really just shoot the signal way, 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 way into the red and get the proper distortion that I'm looking for. The 2 fuzz settings kind of can, you can bring them to the mix for a certain little bit of color, but they're not really very distinct or proper usually. I think it's a pretty popular softer pedal for guitar players, and I'm sure it has different characteristic on guitar, but kind of with a contact mic, the fuzz settings in comparison to the overdrive aren't that impressive. And I talked to some people recently about it, I think on the Discord or somewhere, and everyone was like, yeah, I do the same thing. I have that pedal, I love it, but I never use the fuzz. I only use the overdrive. So that pedal, occasionally, and then I have a couple other pedals that I kind of rotate in and out for some, if I need a little more color or a little more gain, or if I have another channel I want to distort. I use a metal muff sometimes. It has a kind of annoying tinny sound that I half like and half hate. I like to sometimes embrace that really kind of cheesy sound and use it full on. Other times I kind of try to hide that characteristic of it, but it has a good EQ. Pretty versatile pedal and super, very, very harsh. Then sometimes I use more for live stuff this Korg, I forget what it's called, this Korg multi-effects pedal. It's kind of the custodian pedal. Grunt's also used it, I think, on the Installation of Blood and Steel tape. There were pictures on the back of it. It's just a digital multi-effects guitar pedal with a ton of different, kind of cheap but good sounding distortion digital effects. It's cool if you don't, because I don't collect pedals. I don't have reverb pedals, or I have a delay, but I never. It's good if you need like a pedal that can give you some chorus if you need it for some reason. But like I said, it's not really a thing I like to have on recordings because you can kind of hear it, kind of lays it bare. But if you want something live that's kind of wild, just to serve a purpose in a big room, it's can be useful. And then sometimes I use a Boss Dr. Sampler, a Dr. Sampler. Contact mics are a big thing, of course. I have some from Pentidacim that he made that's what I use the most often. Particularly one that's a double contact mic. It's 2 contact mics with clips going into one cable. And the cool thing about that is that you can have one either feeding back and the other one kind of stimulating or vibrating, kind of like in a typical fashion. Or if you stimulate them both at the same time or crush them both at the same time, it kind of seems to overload the signal and like kind of cuts it out and gives this kind of like clipped out effect that sometimes I like to use. I've kind of stopped liking to use that because it's a little, I don't know, I think it's a little overheard these days in harsh noise. It's kind of become this sort of sound. It's become quite used. But it's a nice sound, but I think I'm kind of retiring it. Oftentimes I use it with some steel wool in my hand. I stole this from Taskmaster. I saw him doing it. And hopefully, I think he was a little annoyed when I told him I did that. He was like, well, time to retire that. So apologies, Nick, for stealing your sauce, but, hopefully you found something else better. That's kind of it for the essentials. There's always something else, and I record into a computer and edit and mix pretty extensively, in Pro Tools previously. Another reason why this, there hasn't been much new work in such a long time is because my Pro Tools is really out of date, and I didn't want to buy a new one because it was super expensive back when I bought it. I've been wanting to learn Reaper for a while, but haven't really fully gotten comfortable with it and haven't really taken the time. It seems pretty simple and straightforward and cool, but I like being able to move around a program pretty quickly when it comes to like editing and stuff like that. And it's frustrating when it's clunky. So I haven't really had that like a DAW at my fingertips that I really feel comfortable in for a while. So I think the last WINCE release I did in 2019, which was on a receiving vault, I think it was recorded straight to tape just because that's what I had at the time. It was just recorded to a tape and then edited down a little bit. But I usually like to multi-track and mix more in a computer. Next question. I'm always curious what the process is when someone takes a longer period away from a project that seems to be their main outlet. Clearly, you've been busy the last few years, but even before that, you went from multiple tapes a year around 2008 to an LP or longer player every year or two. That is an interesting question. I think there are multiple parts to it. For one, yeah, I mean, a lot of times doing a WINCE doesn't feel good. And I think around 2008, when this person said I was doing multiple releases, I can't remember, but I think that was when I was still figuring out the project and it hadn't really hit its stride. I think the first one hadn't really hit its purpose or its essence. I think the first one that really did was the self-titled one that was the first White Centipede Noise tape. And I think I'm guessing that was 2010-ish. And this one was like the first one where it felt really shitty, and it was like a really like expulsion of like bad feelings going into making that. And I was really happy with it, and it felt satisfying, but in the end, but it wasn't like, oh, I want to do more. And I do like making something that I think is good and taking the time and making it right, and then putting it out there and letting it kind of live for a while. I don't always feel the urge to do it again and repeat myself and do something new. I mean, outlet is kind of a term that I do need it as an outlet sometimes, but it's not something like I need to. It's not like a regular exercise, like a therapy session that I need to like do daily or weekly just to get stuff out. A lot goes into it actually, like just kind of like mentally, time wise too. But yeah, it doesn't feel great, so it's not like I always need to do it. Label work and things like that are kind of a different thing. I do get a lot of satisfaction from them, but a different kind. And it's label work and even like a podcast, it's easier in the sense that, it doesn't require giving really much of your inner guts. Like, it doesn't require that kind of like opening up or vulnerability or like digging around. Whereas, so it's a lot of work. But it's kind of for other people, and it's fun. It's kind of mindless in some way. Like running a distro, it's not mindless, but you're just kind of you're processing packages, you're emailing people, you're having a social contact, you're sending things out, you're getting money coming in. It's a different kind of satisfaction, and it takes up more time also. And it's an easy distraction too. That's I think the problem with it is that like sometimes I know when I have something I need to do that's kind of that's important but kind of weighty. Then you find other things that need to happen. Like that's when you want to clean the house, when you have to like write a letter to someone about something pretty serious. You're like, oh well, I should first go cook a meal, and then you spend like the afternoon doing something totally unrelated because you're kind of looking for a busy distraction, procrastination from something that's more painful to do. And I think in some ways that's kind of like what label work is, and that's something that I've, and there's been a lot of other things going on in my life in the meantime as well. I mean, it's been very busy, but I think I'm aware of that, and I'm trying to kind of resist that and really trying to force myself to put more focus into the Project WINCE going forward, because it is important for me to do. It is ultimately more satisfying than something like a label or a distro, which is just kind of, I mean, a distro is basically a business. Like there's nothing really that ultimately separates it from if I were doing an Amazon shop. I mean, I'm selling and dealing with something like really cool that I love, but it's not art by any means. Neither is a podcast. A podcast is journalism and whatever. It is a different kind of engagement, and there is more of me that goes into it to do the podcast in terms of the interviews themselves, and then like editing it takes a really long time and is a creative process that I get something from, but it's not the same as doing WINCE. It's not the same as doing noise or art that, takes something out of you. Next question. How much has the creative process changed from the inception of the project to now? I know you played a fest a few years back, but do you have any future plans for live performance? The creative process has changed quite a bit. I mean, especially from the very beginning, like the first few releases when I switched over to a new name, where I think the first one was the one on, Gaping Hole, which I don't like. I mean, that's not one I'm really proud of. Just it wasn't really much there. It was just trying to do something that would be accepted by the label, and I wasn't really I didn't really know what I was doing at that point yet. And I changed the name honestly because, and it's kind of embarrassing to admit this, but I'd rather be honest about it. But the name of the product before was Cookie, and I wanted to be on Gaping Hole. I was talking to Pat and wanted to submit him something. He's like, well, I'm never going to release something by the name Cookie. He told me straight up. And then that was kind of like, yeah, that's a bad name. I thought of that at some point. I thought it didn't have the effect that I wanted it to. So I changed it just kind of based off that, knowing I wanted to anyway, but another person that I looked up to at the time and still do, telling me that the name sucked was enough to be like, yeah, you're right, this sucks. So WINCE became WINCE quickly, but it wasn't really WINCE yet until that first self-titled tape. So the question, yeah, so it's evolved since then. A lot of the main gear has stayed the same, but my recording, mixing, compositional process has evolved a lot. You know, like the peak, I think, of like the multi-track compositional episodic release being Traum, the CD on Freak Animal, which really was composed from the ground up, from a lot of source material. And what I'm doing now is like pure like audiophile editing in a computer, and very different from what I did then. But still, I think the intent for like creating like ugly, uncomfortable, but kind of ecstatic harsh noise is still there. That has kind of been the consistent thing I'm always searching for. Next question, can you discuss the software you're using now? I don't want to discuss that, actually. Maybe someday I will, but I am still a proponent of keeping things like that private for whatever reason. Not forever, but at this point, I don't really want to go into detail about how I'm doing what I'm doing. So now jumping over to the Discord, there's some more questions here. We discussed the Lamar Gant choice briefly before, but perhaps you could discuss its relevance and any other of your cover art if there is a particular significance. So that's referring to the cover art of Traum, the CD on Freak Animal. At the time, I was powerlifting pretty regularly. I've never really been that into sports or anything like that, but my good friend and roommate at the time was really into it and Olympic lifting, and he convinced me. I mean, it just seemed fun. He convinced me to start doing it and brought me to this really cool gym where it was really a positive experience. It was also kind of a distraction from other things that I should have been doing that were harder to do, in the sense that like requiring more mental investment and commitment. Sports is something that is hard to do, but all you really have to do is turn your mind off and do it, or turn your mind on and do it, however you want to look at it, and then you get results and it feels good. So it's a good thing to do. I really value it, but it's I think it's a replacement sometimes for people for dealing with more complex issues in their lives. But anyway, so I was into powerlifting, and kind of like just started researching this sport a bit, kind of really cursorily, but discovered Lamar Gant, who was a champion powerlifter. I don't know what kind of championships he won, but he was very, very decorated. And he had like scoliosis or something where his spine was, crooked to the side. And it seemed that this allowed him better leverage for lifting, particularly, I think, benching and deadlifting, because his arms were like lower to the ground. So this was and so the photo is him lifting on the front, and on the back is him like flexing, and you see his crooked spine. I was working on this release at a time where I was going through a lot of changes. I was preparing to pretty much close down my life in the US and move to Germany. I was going through that process. It felt very much like a kind of like a cleansing, heavy lifting process. It's a positive release for sure. I mean, it was very much like a celebratory, challenging thing that I was trying to convey with that whole release, I think. Looking back on it, I mean, what exactly I was trying to say or whatever is unknown to me, but something like that. And it just sort of came together. I just was working the material, and then I saw that image and I just thought of it, and it was like, yes, this is it. Also, like, yeah, I think also the fact that it was on Freak Animal, like, it just seemed like the right kind of image to use. For whatever reason, I think like in the background, actually, you see like the board of all the countries are there, and it's like, I think Finland is like the only one that isn't finished in the US, something like that. Like it had, and that wasn't part of why I chose it, but after I chose it, it sort of had revealed itself a lot of kind of different layers of meaning to me. Other artwork is usually just kind of comes to me suddenly, and then I know that it's the right thing. Mostly, I mean, there's some things that aren't so perfect, but it's usually pretty intuitive. Next question here. I would be interested in knowing the following. As you constantly interview artists about their work, resources, approaches, gear, etc., does this affect or influence you as an artist? And if so, how? That's an interesting question. I'm sure it does. I pretty consciously try not to, like adapt or take ideas from other artists or sound like other artists, or, you know, it's a double-headed sword. That's kind of a reason why I don't like to talk about gear too much. I don't think I would want to take gear ideas from someone else, but I feel like that's something every person should kind of discover on their own through trial and error and experimentation, really. And I think too much talk about how you get a certain sound, it just encourages people to try that out themselves too. I don't know. Anyway, so I'm sure, yes. I mean, I am influenced a lot as an artist by just kind of more the attitudes of people. And I think what it more of, it's like more than influenced, it's like epiphanies or confirmation. And I actually interviewed Eric Stonefeld recently from Hum of the Druid, and he talked about the phenomenon of epiphany, and how for him it's not necessarily like coming up with an idea on your own. It's like sometimes it's hearing or seeing or receiving an idea or an image from someone else, and then realizing that this is also in you, and that you've known this all along, and having it like confirmed from someone else, and finding, so that happens a lot where I'm listening to someone talk and someone will say something and I'm like, yes, I've never known how to say it, but that's absolutely true. That's exactly how I feel. Or the opposite, or, disagreeing with something that someone says, or it definitely puts my own ideas and philosophies to work, and to challenge, I challenge them in my own head. Sometimes we discuss that, but in terms of like directly influencing me to do one thing or another, I don't think so. Next one. I remember you expressing interest into digital noise making tools such as Max MSP for WINCE. How did that manifest, if at all? Can you share some light on your production process for the new record, and maybe why you wanted to have this different approach? Yeah, like I said already in the beginning, it was something I've been searching for and curious about for a long time. Max MSP, I was just kind of like, oh, I have to learn it perfectly, and it's going to take me years to find the perfect tools and the perfect sound with these new tools. And I found another method that's really quite primitive in some ways, and untechnical, at least comparatively. So I still want to explore more with more sophisticated software methods, but that's definitely a direction I'm generally wanting to work in at this point. What are your top 5 noise releases of all time? People ask me this a lot, and I don't know. I don't really want to answer that, but I'll go with top 5. I'll go with top 5 Tronics releases of all time. Tronics CDs that came out between like 2007 and 2010, because those are formative for me, and they are still like probably few of them are definitely on my top 5 list. Let's see. Cherry Point, Night of the Bloody Tape CD. One of the harshest, best, densest, most violent, examples of that sound. Always going to be a favorite. And in that, I have to mention Thousands of Dead Gods by the Rita. Just very formative for me. When I found that out, it really had a big impact on me. I don't go back and listen to it that often, but it'll always be like extremely important to me. And when I do listen to it, it's always like, oh yeah, this is the shit. Sewer Election and Trerix Rose at the Killing Sessions CD, which is a reissue of like the two tapes that were on Harshhead Rituals. This also, especially the first track, Killing for Norland, has a really, really special, obtuse sound to it. This crunch, this kind of bubble. There's nothing overtly super harsh about it. It's a weird, ugly, broken, bubbling sound that I think is genius. And I sometimes like wonder how, I don't know, I sometimes wonder like, well, I realize, okay, these guys have really advanced ears and tastes to have landed on this, because when you're messing around, two guys making harsh noise, it's very, very easy to land on something much, much more obvious and much, much more simple. And somehow the timbre of that is so, there's something so eerie and off about it, and I love it. Every time I hear it, it's goosebumps. Mania, Armed to the Teeth. This, among many Mania releases, is maybe my favorite. Just those long gun range samples are really unsettling, and the high frequency, full frequency, kind of like piercing, heavy produced, crusty noise, a lot of layers going on, a lot of really sophisticated, I think, playing with really still simple and crude sonic elements. Just, a masterful artist, kind of one of my favorite releases by him. I also had like the special edition one with a bonus CDR and hand painted thing that I got from him, so it just has a special place for me. And then maybe the last one, reissue of Lo-Fi Power Carnage by Dead Body Love, another very, very influential release for me. Of course, these are all very these are not very diverse in sound or approach or era, but they're all kind of really what I love the most still in harsh noise, and just some classics that, I'm not a big collector. I get what I get. I get what's available. I get what I get in trades. I get what is. So I don't really have a deep library or collection of classics and rare stuff. I have a pretty simple meat and potatoes noise collection. Those are the most meat and potatoes examples, I think, but they're still, that's 5 of the best for me. Next one. Is there any release you truly regret releasing? I know plenty of people discuss wishing they could delete a release from their catalog, but I usually find it's because they were fairly new in their noise journey and just know much more now than they knew back then. I'm more so thinking about a release that maybe you weren't even sure of back when it came out that never aged well with you. Those kind of cases interest me the most. You're right on like the early stuff. Like I said, like the Gaping Hole tape and a couple that came after that weren't quite there yet. I don't really regret putting them out, but they don't need to be there. Everything I think after the self-titled I feel really good about and has a special kind of meaning or purpose, and I felt like it was of pretty good quality for my standards. There was a 4-way split that came out on Total Black that I didn't like. The material I gave for it wasn't good. I don't like it looking back on it. And I knew it kind of as I sent it off. I did know it, and but I'd worked on it for a while. It was a short track. It was hard to make a short track, and it was kind of like, well, worked on it for a while, and wanted to deliver, so I sent it. And then I didn't really like how the release came out in general, for a number of reasons. So that's one that I don't really, I don't need it. I don't think anyone needs it. It wasn't I don't think it was a proper release. Next question. I've been thinking about how to word this, but I remember a while back you discussed the first 2 tracks of Shame going over a bunch of people's heads. I was wondering if you have any more thoughts about how that played out, or if that affected your approach moving forward one way or another. I don't know if I put it that way, that it went over people's heads. That sounds pretty arrogant, I guess, but maybe I put it that way. But I think that was a release that was originally intended for Stiff Sanctorum, which then never materialized. A lot of back and forth, and then they disappeared. So I released it on a CD together. So it was supposed to be those first 2 tracks on the A side, and the longer 20-minute track that's much more heavy on the B side. And the first 2 tracks are really kind of like, I was really going for as much as possible that really broken, unsettling, dejected, hissing sound, really unsatisfying. And I just remember hearing from a couple of people that were like, that got it, that were like, yeah, that CD is cool. Like the last track, the final track is great, because it's like you have these 2 tracks that are really kind of torturous and slow and uncomfortable, and then the third track is like this like crushing wall, kind of classic heavy sound. And that was for me like the least important part of the release, and I should have maybe made the whole release kind of in the one direction. The idea was that the B side would be kind of a cleansing after the A side. I think that kind of sound is just not for everyone. If you don't like that type of sound, if you don't really listen to it, if you don't listen to it on a proper volume, proper playback with the kind of right mindset, it can kind of maybe just sound like fussy, kind of weak dribbling or hissing, and it's not for everyone, and that's okay. But I wish I had, I think with putting the longer track on there that was so much more heavy, it was not quite committing to, well, it seemed like it wasn't quite committing to the approach of the A side. I still really like that release overall, but it didn't really change anything how I would do things in the future, but it kind of made me more conscious of that I really want to push. If I'm going to push that feeling, I want to push it all the way. And I still want to make a WINCE release that really, really, really just hangs in that really uncomfortable, awkward area and dips its toes into the kind of the sucking, crunching sound that gives you something to hang on to, but really, really just kind of stays really out there and in the fringes. And it's hard to do. Every time I started to do that with my kind of old setup, I start with something in that direction, but the more you build it and try to make it good in some way or complete, the more you add to it, and the more you kind of then eventually end up with something more filled out and substantial, and then kind of not really achieving that really difficult sound. But I still am kind of chasing that, and hopefully someday we'll do a release that's like really an exercise, an effective exercise and exposition of that experience. When are you going to come play the West Coast? I really don't play live that often, and it's really not kind of what I focus on with the project. West Coast, I have no plans to play the West Coast anytime soon. If someone really were to invite me in a serious way, I would consider trying to make it happen, but I don't focus on playing live that often, and West Coast is very far away. So if someone wants to invite me and maybe fly me out there or something like that, I would definitely consider it, but I don't see that happening anytime soon. Top 5 software plugins, don't really have any. Top 5 dead or alive. I'm guessing this is like referring to rappers or MCs, because this is kind of usually how, unless it's top 5 noise dead or alive, but usually top 5 dead or alive. And I know who asked this, and it's kind of a hip hop head. So I don't know. That's people talk about those kind of questions. I feel like that question applies to like the best lyricists. When you talk about the top 5, you're talking about people like like the Nas's, the Jay-Z's, people like that. I don't listen to too much of that kind of stuff these days, like the classic golden era lyrical hip hop. A lot of the stuff I listen to now is really kind of the more like modern, new, more street oriented stuff, and it's admittedly not as like focused on like quality of lyrics or penmanship or coherent artistry. It's kind of more about some sort of feeling or vibe, and also like the character and charisma of the artist. So a lot of those people that I really like to listen to these days. I wouldn't really put on a top 5 best list, but if I were to talk about like top 5 like real rappers, probably Ghostface Killah. He's always like one of the most surreal, like fucked up, serious, emotional, hard to decipher, but like best lyricists. I really like LP, who I don't really like his new stuff, but his early records, Company Flow, but more so like Fantastic Damage. That's and more so his work as a producer too. Like that is some of the most, still, I mean, it's kind of like the more backpacky side of things that I've kind of grown out of, but that was a big introduction to kind of the more atonal and noisy side of music production, and I still think those, the Cannibal Ox record he produced and Fantastic Damage, that album, are like, I don't know, he's a musical hero of mine. And Run the Jewels and the newer stuff, I've come around to liking it and accepting it, but it's not the same. But he's still still one of my favorites. I would say maybe rappers, maybe Noriega. He's definitely not like that good, but he has a really unique style, especially in his earlier career. Was really, really trying hard. It seemed like he stopped trying at some point pretty quick. But like the War Report, the Capone Noriega album, is like one of the best New York street albums of that era, and it's pretty underrated. And his flow and his whole approach is really just different, and I really love it. Three, I would say Kendrick Lamar, kind of a more modern contemporary artist. I really think he's one of the very true artists, I think, in hip hop, who is simultaneously like authentic to, I think, street culture and hip hop culture and its origins, and like a really like forward thinking and honest, authentic, almost avant-garde artist. I'm not really into like a lot of that kind of weirdo rap or whatever, but he really isn't that. And I think he's just one of the best. And then last one, I don't know. Last one, I'm gonna say Young Dolph. He's not a very good rapper by any means. His music is super simplistic. He has like 4 subject matters, like money, drugs, bitches, and like killing or whatever, and like just rotates like within 4 bars he'll rotate like one line about each one of those topics every time. It gets super incoherent, but he just has such charisma, and like his voice and delivery is just it's so good and so true. I became a fan of his like a few months before he died. I discovered him and like became a big fan right away. I know he'd been doing his thing for a long time, and then died like a few months later, which was really, really sad for me. And since then I listened to him like all the time. He's just one of my favorite rappers. Definitely not on any type of level like lyrically comparable to Kendrick Lamar or Ghostface or any of those guys, but he's awesome. Anyway, sorry for the rap talk at the end. I don't know if that's what you meant by top 5 Dead or Alive, but there it is. So anyway, thanks for listening to my little self-interview here about WINCE. Go check out New Rules for Slaughter Volume 1. It's on Bandcamp at whitesempinoise.bandcamp.com. Hopefully there'll be more from WINCE soon. I'm feeling rejuvenated and finally awake from my long slumber. Ryan O'Connor from Ineffable Slime, who's great, and recent album called Stalking the Sphinx on Virtues is really, really good. Really recommend picking that up. Interview with Nicola Vinciguerra, aka Tisbor, aka Fecal Love, Italian Pervert. Interview with Eric Stonefeld of Hum of the Druid. Great project. Low-key kind of outsider from the scene. Really smart and great artist. There'll be hopefully some Unsound Heads stuff soon, new episodes. I want to talk to people about their time in Asia, the Thailand shows, and of course all the Japanese shows that have gone on. I need to have some like ground reports about that, so I'll hopefully be talking about to some people who are there. More podcast stuff happening all the time. New podcast episodes will be mostly one part public, one part Patreon, going forward from here. And, I'll also be kind of releasing things I want to. Today's a Patreon, week, but I'll probably put this up publicly just for the hell of it. So, the only way to really know and get everything is to be on the Patreon. It's €5 a month, pretty affordable for weekly content. Keep watching, keep listening. Thank you. Goodbye.